What is a calculator? You might be wondering who I am asking this kind of question. I mean, this is Nerd Night, right? And calculators, they're about the most canonical nerd item out there. So what is a calculator? Well, I'll tell you who I am, and then I'll let you figure out whether I'm qualified to answer that. So, as Nicole said, I'm Rata, and by day I work at Turanga. I moonlight at Ferrymead Heritage Park, where I drive trams and restore heritage instruments from the Edwardian and subsequent technologies. I'm also an organiser of Math Jam, and Math Jam is a meet-up in a pub once a month where people sit down and do maths for fun. You're all welcome if you want to come along. A spin-off of Math Jam is Oceania Math Jam Gathering. OMG. So Oceania Math Jam Gathering is a weekend-long version of Math Jam. It also includes talks, it includes mathematical baking, it includes games and puzzle hunts. It's a lot of fun. It's recreational maths. Again, everyone's welcome. When I'm not doing all those things, I'm one of the founders of Mathiteca, and Mathiteca is New Zealand's public space for mathematics. It's not technically a space yet, that's the vision. At the moment, we're doing mostly outreach activities to encourage enjoyment of mathematics. So we do public talks, again we do workshops. For National Poetry Month last month we did a mathematical poetry workshop. And we do a lot of other things as well. If you're interested, there are flyers by the door for both Math Jam Gathering and Mathiteca, so pick those up and come along. One of the reasons, though, that I started Mathiteca is to fulfill a dream of mine. So I've been collecting calculators since I was in high school, and my ultimate dream is to create a calculation museum. And I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about what is a calculator in the last decade or so, since I started collecting calculators. And when I'm asking what is a calculator, I'm looking at some of the weird edge cases, some of those really strange things that may or may not be calculators. It's a bit like that question, what is a sandwich? If you accept that a sandwich is bread with filling inside, then surely a hot dog is a sandwich, right? Or you could come up with some rather perverse ideas of what a sandwich might be. It's a bit about the filling of the sandwich, it might be a bit about the structure of the thing, but in the end, it comes down to where you draw the line on what a sandwich is. And that's what we're going to be doing today with this What is a Calculator talk. Typically, when I first ask people what they think a calculator is, they say something along the lines of, it's a tool we use to do maths. And that's a pretty good definition, right? But doesn't that also include things like pencils or laptops? It might also include something like this. That's a cubarhythm. Now, a cubarhythm is it's a board that you can fill up with these beads there. You can see a bit of a close-up with the yellow beads, therefore making braille. And it's a tool for keeping track of numbers. You can also write with letters with it, and it's a lot easier to keep track of numbers with a cubarhythm if you're blind than writing with a pencil. But all of these things, tools that we might use to do maths, they aren't quite what you'd think of when you think of calculators, right? Really, a calculator is more something that we're using to perform calculations. It's not just doing maths. And so what do we mean by calculations? Let's look a bit closer. So calculator, before it meant the thing you might think of when you hear calculator, it actually meant a person who is doing calculating, a person who reckons. And that comes from calculus. And I'm actually going before Newton and Leibniz, the calculus of differences. The calculus originally meant to do accounting or reckoning. Incidentally, Newton and Leibniz they're famous for inventing calculus. They also, this may be slightly apocryphal, but they also both died from calculus. And I don't mean that in the mathematical sense. Calculus also does mean, in a medical sense, an concretion in the body, like a kidney stone. And there's evidence that they were both suffering from gout and abdominal pain when they passed away. So live by the calculus, die by the calculus. Well, that does give us a little bit more of a clue of what calculus or calculation means. It actually comes from calculi or calc. It's the diminutive version of limestone. So calculus started out as a little pebble. And that brings us to our first kind of calculators that we're going to look at today. So these are placeholder or accounting calculators, and these are some of our earliest calculators. So we're going back to around 2700 BCE. Back then, what they used to calculate was an abacus, a sandboard. So it was just a table covered in sand. You'd draw lines in the sand with your fingers, and you'd use that as placeholders. You could then place pebbles between those lines in the sand. You can count up, you can take them away again, and keep track of your calculations. The earliest extant version of this that we have is the Salami's tablet. And no, I'm not talking about sandwiches now. The Salami's tablet was a tablet that was made a bit more permanent. It was made out of marble, and it was discovered on the island, the Greek island of Salamis. So you'll see that picture in the middle of the slides there. That's the Salami's tablet, and that would have been used with little pebbles. Very familiar, of course, the abacus. So the abacus is an even more kind of permanent version of this abax sandboard. It is beads on rods or something like that. And skipping ahead a few centuries or perhaps millennia, by the 16th century, pretty much every major culture in the world had independently created their own kind of abacus to do accounting with. By the 16th century, well, we're starting to move into some new types of calculators. A new calculator on the block is our tabular calculators and graphical calculators. So, in the early 1600s, a man called John Napier, here we go, John Napier discovered logarithms, or invented logarithms, however you want to swing it. And he decided to use these for calculation. It was quite a useful decision. And people went crazy for this. They were generating log tables, just tables and tables, using logs written out, and you could then, once they've been calculated, you can look them up again and perform your calculations a lot quicker than you had to do beforehand. So you've got a book, it's full of numbers, and you can learn or you can find out your calculations based on looking something up in a book. Would you call that a calculator? I'm going to say no. And the reason I want to say no is because the information's already there, right? When you are using a calculator, it feels more like an active thing. It's calculating, right? And this is already calculated. So I would call this, and this is my own terminology, a calculated. So let's revise our definition a little bit more. Instead of saying that it's a tool that we use to perform calculations, we're going to say it's a device. It's something we have to interact with in some way. And it will automatically find this connection for us, this mathematical connection between an input and an output. And I'm going to show you some examples of that now. So up on the screen, you'll see some very cool tabular calculators. So the basis of this is some kind of table underneath the surface, but you have to interact with it in a way that exposes the answer. So the monkey one, you move his feet, and as you move the feet, that automatically moves the arms of the monkey, so it's surrounding the correct answer for a multiplication. In the picture, one of his feet is pointing to 5 and the other's pointing to 9. The number that his hands are holding is 45. You also see a map distance calculator. I don't know if some of you might have used those before. You just slide the table inside the little envelope there with the map on it, and there's holes punched in the locations of cities. Now, as you slide, it has different city names that come up across the top of the map, and if you look at the city's holes, then it will give you the distance from your elected city to the city that's in each of the holes. So some rather cool examples of that where you're using this kind of window onto a table, but there's also continuous scales that you can use. So things like a slide rule, where you have a scale that you can move around, line up 2 different scales as your input, and read off from a 3rd scale your answer. Or something that might be quite appealing to us here at Nerd Night is the drinkulator. I have it on the table over there. I might just grab it. So the drinkulator is a calculator that's got a scale printed on the side. You actually do need a beverage inside in order to use it, because you're using that beverage to line up the 3 points on your scale. On this side, we have a multiplication scale, and you can line up from one side to the other to perform a multiplication. So come up after the talk and you can have a look at this up close. But then if we've got these sort of sliding calculators, they're not necessarily mathematical. These examples I've got here, we've got one that allows you to transpose musical keys, and another one that allows you to keep track of what you should be doing in a formal meeting, a slider rule for meeting proceedings. So if we're thinking about calculators, do we want to include this in our calculator definition, or are we going to hew more to the mathematical side? We might need that word back in there. We're going to skip forward a couple of centuries now, 1784. That was the first year that the word calculator was used to refer to a device rather than a person. A mechanical calculator. Now, mechanical calculators were also invented in around the 1600s. The Pascaline that you'll see just up on the screen now, that has little wheels that you input numbers with. That was invented in the 1600s as well, but they were really starting to gain traction by about the 1800s, 1900s, and by the early 1900s, you were getting ones popping up on office desks, used right through until the 1960s. An excellent proliferation of mechanical calculators. Now, one of my favourites is the Curt calculator. It's about the size of a pepper shaker. It's fully mechanical, and it can perform addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division, up to 15 numbers, 15 significant figures, and it fits in your pocket. It's an incredible feat of engineering. I've got a picture of it up on the screen there. You also notice the Walter WSR down in the bottom corner. Now that is a calculator that's manufactured by the same company that made James Bond's guns, so precision manufacturing. And of course, as our technology progressed, we started to move into electronic calculators. So electronic calculators are what people typically think of when I first say calculators, and certainly there are a lot of those too. It was 1946, the first year that calculator was used to refer to something that was an electronic device. So our sense of calculator isn't even 100 years old. And people didn't necessarily trust those digital calculators when they first came out. If you look up on the screen there, the Sharp Elsie-Mate, it came with a Soroban abacus on it because people didn't trust those digital figures. They wanted to use the abacus instead because they were quicker and more trustworthy to use the algorithms they could perform on an abacus. But over the course of the 20th century, electronics were getting better and better, smaller and smaller, and cheaper to produce. So we got all sorts of calculators, from novelty ones like the Chocolator to a calculator watch you could have on your wrist. They also got more and more powerful and more software based. The functions got more and more prolific until they were basically resembling computers. And we're moving into the realm of simulated calculators now. So probably the calculator you use most often these days is a simulated calculator, something that is on your phone. It has nothing to do with the hardware anymore. It's running on whatever hardware can run it and performing calculations in a completely different way than what we've seen before. It might be something like Microsoft Excel, or you could look up something in a web browser like, how long is it going to take me to say this talk if I put in this many words? But if simulated calculators are calculators, then are you a calculator? I mean, if you can compute 13 times 3 in your head, does that mean you're a calculator? You're performing the mathematical operations the same way that a computer might? Well, if you are calculators, that's a bit of a logistical problem for me, because I'm trying to start a calculator museum. And so we're going to narrow down our definition a little bit more by saying it's a purpose-built item. It's self-contained. But is a computer a calculator? I mean, that's still purpose-built and self-contained, but it's very powerful and it can do a lot of things that we wouldn't traditionally think calculators can do. I think computers are too generalised. We have to cut them out of our calculator definition as well. That's not to say that calculators can't disguise themselves as computers, or even floppy disks. So we'll narrow down our definition a little bit more. We're going to say that calculators have a fixed and mostly pre-configured set of mathematical operations that they can perform. It's not anything they can do. They're not going to be mixing music for you, mostly. Some of them do, but that's another story. They're a fixed set of mathematical calculations that you can use as a tool. But that doesn't quite answer our full question, because there's still things called programmable calculators. And are they calculators? I mean, it's in the name, programmable calculators. And I will admit, programmable calculators are calculators to me. I think there is definitely a fuzzy boundary between something that's a general purpose computing device and something that's a calculator, and programmable calculators straddle that line. We can put it on a bit of a spectrum. So there's things that need an external operator, things that are tools for humans, and then there are things that can operate themselves, like computers, where the maths is taken away, hidden in the background for the most part, because they're mostly functional. They're playing the part of both the operator and the calculator in a sense. So if I was to define a calculator, I'd put it about there on the spectrum. So it's not something that can fully operate itself. It's still a tool with those fixed settings for us. A computer, on the other hand, is much more modifiable. It's more generalised. And not to forget my terminology, a calculator is something that's fully fixed, that we're not operating at all, apart from looking things up in it. It's purely information. So I think that's the main thing I want to say about calculators, is that they're a fundamentally human device. They're something that we're using as a tool. often when people are trying to argue with me about what a calculator is, a lot of fun on my part anyway, they say, oh, but calculators are something that you get to do the maths for you. They take the thinking away. And I think that's taking a lot for granted. When we're doing calculations, we actually have to understand how to use the device that we're using. Otherwise, how do we know what it's giving us is sensible? And it really goes to show when you look at operation manuals for various calculation devices over the years, I've brought along with me actually, this is from Texas Instruments, the Great International Math on Keys book. And this was a way to show people how to use these newfangled electronic calculators that were coming out. It's a full guidebook on how to press the right buttons to get the answers you want for calculating basic things from painting your fence to operating your motor vehicle and knowing how much gasoline to use. So it's quite an interesting historical document in that sense. A lot of the things that you need to know about using calculators are actually in our lived experience and how we understand the world. We need the guidebooks, we need the algorithms on how to use these things. The same sense of intimidation you might feel at being asked to use an abacus, not knowing the instructions and how it actually works, might be how people felt about calculators when they first came along in electronic form. When you see a pinwheel calculator sitting on the table and you wonder how to use it, well, that's the thing. That's what we're using as a tool. I think that a calculator has to have a skilled operator at the helm. So that's really where I've got to so far with my definition on what is a calculator: a purpose-built, self-contained device that automatically performs a fixed, mostly pre-configured set of mathematical calculations based on user input that help us do maths. And that's all I'll say for now, but if you are interested in calculators, well, I've got a few on the table. I have many more at home, and if you want to support Mathiteca in any way, that will be another step forward to making a calculator museum where people can continue to enjoy calculations and thinking about numerical patterns in new ways. Until then, calculator.
Thank you so much, Rata. What a great calculator pun at the end, too. Any questions tonight? Here we go.
So I think you've got a sense of when the calculator began, and you could probably give it a date of birth. Do you, and you say that simulated calculators aren't really calculators, so that's most of what we all would use our calculator in our day-to-day. Is the calculator then dead? Is there a date of death for the calculator? Or, have you got a complete window of time that you have to gather all the calculators that were made for your museum? Is it a finite project?
Well, that's sort of what's happening, because it's quite hard to collect simulated calculators. I wouldn't say that a simulated calculator isn't a calculator. We're functionally using it that way. Just because the hardware isn't there doesn't mean it's not there as an idea. It's not there as a calculator. So I wouldn't say it's got a date of death, but in terms of something physical and manipulatable, there isn't as much innovation going on in that space now than there was, say, in the mid-20th century, which was a golden age for calculators in the sense that a lot of materials had suddenly become available, had become cheap, and there was also quite a few big changes happening in the way we use numbers. For instance, the decimalisation of currency and of measurements happened in 1967, and in New Zealand that is, and similar dates around other places in the world. And during that time, there were so many promotional things that came out that allowed you to do calculations to work out how much do I add to my recipes now that my recipe books are in the old way and now we've got new ways of measuring, or what does a shilling equal in the new currency? So there's a whole lot of promotional little calculators from that era. So that is a big part of my collection, but it's certainly not the end of the collection. I'm always on the lookout for new types.
Anything else? Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
Would you classify a tally stick as a calculator?
No, I wouldn't classify a tally stick as a calculator because it's only keeping count, so it's a bit more like a memory device. It is true that you can add to it, so you could marginally call it a calculator in that you are adding, but it only has the fixed function of adding, which is very limited. So I'd call it more like a calculated, and that you've calculated how many things, or any kind of measurement devices, more along the lines of that than a calculator in the adjective sense.
Thank you. That's probably the time we have, so let's give Rata another round of applause.